Jewish and Christian traditions. The translation of his name means "who is like unto God." The Christian celebration stems from 3 verses in Revelation. And this is the reading that we heard on Sunday. "And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought, and his angels prevailed not. Neither was their place any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." So that, in a sense, is our focus of what we seem to believe. There's a very significant comment about St. Michael in a book called Churches in the Landscape, which is published in 1989 by Richard Morris. And he is discussing the unevenness of the veneration of St. Michael in England, Wales. And this is what he actually said: "If Michael had actually lived, an explanation could be sought in the presence of his relics at certain places and the influence of such cult centres upon lesser churches in their hinterland or in their direct possession. But in an age which set great store by the physical remains of saints, Michael stands out as one who had led, and in the medieval mind continued to lead, an excarnate existence. Heavy concentrations of dedications to him cannot therefore be accounted for in ordinary hagiographical terms." Now, out of that passage, I'll just pick out that one phrase about St. Michael having an excarnate existence. I think it's the first time in my 75 years that I've actually ever used that word. In fact, I think I only found out about it about 2 months ago. I knew about incarnate, but not excarnate. Now, I should have said at the beginning that my text it will be available to anybody who wants it afterwards, because I will go around in levels, and you might say in circles. And there's a complicated argument here, and you may want to think about it afterwards as well. The point that Richard Morris is making, and the point I want to make, is that St. Michael is a symbolic figure who has been personified and drawn into the Christian tradition. It is what he represents rather than his substance which explains his importance. St. Michael is celebrated in both the Eastern and Western traditions of Christianity. Where St. Michael is concerned, there is always a strong reminder of an eternal conflict between good and evil. Marie Desiree Anderson makes the point that even the symbolic representations on the external structure of a church, whether they're statues of St. Michael or indeed gargoyles, may be the physical manifestation of the boundary between good and evil. And the heart of this philosophical manifestation is best represented by St. Michael. You have to watch out for unhelpful people who confuse what they see. Because on one occasion, I came up here and George Smith just informed me that he'd explained to a member of the public about the St. George statue over the church doorway, and we had to chase after this man to explain to him that it was in fact St. Michael. Now, so people can get confused. As early as the time of the Emperor Constantine, a church was dedicated to St. Michael on the outskirts of Constantinople at Sosthenion. The Eastern tradition especially commemorated St. Michael as a special guardian of the sick, and this church at Constantinople was built by Constantine specially to support the sick. Elsewhere, in Greece and Asia Minor, hot springs were dedicated to this saint. In the Coptic tradition, St. Michael is the patron saint of the River Nile. And that has given rise to a particular celebration of St. Michael in Ethiopia on the 19th of June. Senai Michael, probably not pronouncing that correctly, at Lalibela, centers around the tomb of the same king, Lalibela, who was buried there in its church in 1221. So we've already beginning to identify the extent of the celebration or commemoration of St. Michael. There is a link in Egypt with an earlier faith system. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, weighing souls before Osiris takes place. And subsequently, in Egypt, the Coptic Church has paid particular reverence, high reverence to St. Michael as the escort of departed souls and the holder of the balance. In the East, there's a feast of the Synaxis of St. Michael and all angels. And that means a synod of angels, which is celebrated on the 8th of November in the Greek, Syrian, and Coptic traditions. So we're still spreading out where he's venerated. In the traditions of the Western Church, St. Michael is honoured, as in the Book of Revelation, as the captain of the heavenly host and the protector of Christians generally and soldiers in particular. In the West, St. Michael was adopted as the patron saint of cemeteries, thereby symbolising his protection of Christian souls beyond the grave. The earliest church in the West that is known to have been dedicated to St. Michael was situated near Rome on the Silurian Way. This 6th century foundation came annually to commemorate its dedication on the 29th of September. And that's the date that then became widely adopted as the principal feast day of St. Michael. Now, he's undoubtedly a symbolic figure, but visions of him were reported at various locations in the time of the early church. Between 492 and 496, a vision was reported on Mount Gargano in the Italian region of Apulia. Subsequently, Pope Gregory the Great believed that during a plague epidemic in Rome, he had seen a vision of St. Michael sheathing his sword above Hadrian's mausoleum, which is now known as the Castle of St. Angelo. In 707, Bishop Aubert of Orange fell asleep at a location known as the Rocher de la Tombe and saw a vision of St. Michael, and immediately set about constructing a church in his honour. In the 10th century, this was rebuilt as a Benedictine abbey, which we now know as Mont Saint-Michel. This legend has led to other visions, such as at St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall and at Stamberg above Stuttgart in Germany. It is the stimulus of all these visions, all seen on hilltops and mountains, that has created the observable pattern of many St. Michael dedications being associated with hilltops and other elevated sites. This pattern was so pronounced that in the 17th century, the topographer John Aubrey actually commented on the regularity of the pattern. The reason I mention that is that Aubrey is operating in an era before anybody's classifying information. There's no encyclopedias, there's no social media. Aubrey was moving about and spotting that these things were on elevated ground. Now, it just so happens I was speaking about this on Sunday at Hampstead Ribware, and I made a list for their benefit, just to prove my point. In North Derbyshire, if you go to Hathersage, which is where, very importantly, little John is buried, Hathersage is a St. Michael church on elevated ground. The two other main St. Michael churches in Staffordshire, Penkridge and Stone, are on elevated sites. If you go to Colwich, you may then begin to say, well, this isn't really true, because when you pull up near Colwich Church, it's on the level, but when you go around the back of Colwich Church, the ground drops away sharply behind, so it is an elevated site. Some of my forebears were baptized in St. Michael's Church at Coventry, which is, of course, in effect the cathedral, what became the cathedral, or next to where the cathedral is now. And that is an elevated site in relation to Coventry. It's my belief, in fact, and I'll get back to my text in a moment, that even the church at Statham Hill, which is dedicated to St. Peter, is in fact a St. Michael church because of its elevated site. And I may remember to say why in a minute. After the Blessed Virgin, St. Peter and St. Paul and All Saints, St. Michael is the fourth most common church dedication in England. By the end of the Middle Ages, there were 686 dedications to St. Michael. Morris, who I referred to earlier, in his book provides a diagram to show the relative densities of the St. Michael dedication in England and Wales. And this shows particular concentrations in Somerset, Gloucestershire, Northamptonshire, East Suffolk, and Dyfed in West Wales. Morris believes that the arrival of monks from Mont Saint-Michel after the Norman conquest may have added momentum to the St. Michael cult. But as at Lichfield, there's plenty of evidence of it flourishing before that time. Very early dedications to St. Michael occur at Malmesbury in Wiltshire, Clive in Gloucestershire, Stanmer in East Sussex, and in Northumberland, Bishop John of Hexham's cemetery oratory was dedicated to St. Michael, and that is, I say, near to Hexham, and it's actually mentioned to that fact by the Venerable Bede. St. Wilfrid, who some of you know, I think is the other great missionary to the Midlands, experienced a vision of St. Michael just before his death in 709, and his clear veneration of St. Michael may have added momentum to the St. Michael cult in the East Midlands, where his mission was strongest. In terms of imagery, St. Michael is frequently shown as slaying a dragon. So here we are at St. Michael's, with both representations of him over the porch and on the reredos, following this tradition. Now, Mary Sharp, in her book, depicts the European artistic pattern as represented St. Michael, quote, in armour with sword, standing over or fighting with a dragon, or with scales. And she explains that St. Michael is regarded as the angel of the resurrection. He receives the souls of the departed and weighs them in the balance. It is he who will sound the great trumpet to bid the dead to arise on the last day. She also actually raises her belief that St. Michael was the angel of the Lord that appeared to Abraham in Genesis 22. More rarely seen, but much more common in the Middle Ages, is the representation of St. Michael weighing souls. Nationally, the places with important representations are places like Swalcliffe in Oxfordshire, Southley in Oxfordshire, Martham in Suffolk, Eton Bishop in Herefordshire, the Trinity Church in Coventry, and Chaldon in Surrey. Some of you, if you remember that David Dimbleby program about church, about architecture, he actually went into the Trinity Church at Coventry, and he was taken up in one of these indoor crane things and gave us a very close-up encounter with what was in the Doom painting in Trinity Church at Coventry. I do recommend it, but it really reinforces this idea of what was going, this idea that souls were being weighed. I want to also mention, well, I grew up near one at Chaldon in Surrey, and that is a Doom representation. The whole of the west end of the church is a huge Doom painting, and within it, the innocent souls are being led or carried by angels towards the final rungs of the ladder to heaven. I would, at this point, this issue of weighing souls, I want to mention at Lichfield the fact that there is, in national terms, a public house with a unique name, the Scales in Market Street. And there's always people debating the fact that the sign at the Scales isn't correct because they think it's related to the erstwhile racecourse. But the Scales in Market Street reflects the traditional understanding of souls being weighed at a location so close to this location, which is, after all, one of the oldest St. Michael sites in England. So I just want to put that out there. The other thing I will mention, this is an avenue that's not been explored properly. The Harleian manuscripts in the British Library show the emblem of St. Michael to be a red cross with trefoil ends on a silver field. but nobody knows precisely the origin of this representation. But I mention it because some years ago, the cathedral was decided to do kneelers, and somebody at the cathedral had found out that this was the official emblem of St. Michael, and couldn't understand why we thought it should be something more appropriate, like the weighing of souls or whatever. So I don't know what they finally did. There are other reasons why the cult of St. Michael may have spread so extensively. Just as the early church took over pagan festivals and converted them into Christian festivals, so also did they substitute Christian saints for Roman and other gods who had a popular following. There is evidence from the time of Constantine that when he converted to Christianity, that in Gaul, the St. Michael cult was used extensively to replace the worship of the classical god Mercury. Such a substitution would have involved the minimum of reorientation for people. Mercury was believed to be the protector of souls and the guardian of flocks and herds, and had links with verdant woodland, and these aspects of Mercury equate strongly with how St. Michael cult was promoted, especially in upland areas and with a pastoral economy. To illustrate the certainty of this idea of a link between Mercury and St. Michael, an example from Lincoln will illustrate this point. In the upper city, in Lincoln, in the steep, there is a plaque commemorating the presence of the Mercury Guild at that site in Roman times. And on the day that I spotted it, as I swung round, I realized that the sign about the Mercury Guild was directly opposite to Michael Gate, which is telling us that there was an ancient St. Michael church at that very location. So it's not that I think that's more than a coincidental juxtaposition. Mercury himself, if he existed, is equally seen as linked with a localized Celtic god called Lugos, who shared the same characteristics as Mercury and St. Michael. And this god occurs in the name of the place in France called Lyon, Lugundum, and in the English Carlisle, which is Lugavilium. And at Lyon, there is iconographical evidence to connect Lugos with a 5th century cult of St. Michael nearby at the Rhone-Saône confluence. And the bishops Carlisle, in medieval times, a place which, say, had this Lugos connection, controlled the church at Melbourne in Derbyshire, and this itself was dedicated to St. Michael. Now, whether this is a coincidence or part of a pattern, it's for you to speculate. There's yet another local Celtic god equated with Mercury called Moccus. You may think I'm making this up. The name occurs at Langres in France. To any foreign language teacher present, I must apologize for my pronunciation, but I speak French like Edward Heath used to. The name translates as pig. Moccus occurs in an English place name at Moccas in Herefordshire. And in the 12th century, it was spelled Mokros, M-O-C-H-R-O-S, which was translated as moor for swine. And at the same time, it was also translated as locus porcorum, for those of you who study Latin. And a Welsh immigrant to Hampstead River on Sunday told me that the Welsh for swine is in fact Mokros. Whether that's true, I don't know. What is quite remarkable is this church at Moccas is dedicated to St. Michael. It's an ancient Christian site which can be dated to 620. I mean, that barely after St. Augustine arrived. So this research I'm referring to, linking St. Michael, Mercury, Lugos and Moccas, is drawn from Richard Morris's research. It provides an extra layer of possibilities for interpreting the presence of early St. Michael dedications in England. Now, for example, also in considering the link between the Roman settlement of Wall and the historic site here on the Green Hill, when the Roman Empire officially adopted Christianity, one of the consequences was the abolition of the worship of a variety of classical gods. As I've said before, St. Michael replaced Mercury. So Roman citizens, soldiers and others will have carried this new awareness with them to the farthest reaches of the empire. And the point you need to know, if you didn't already, is that the positioning of Roman soldiers was usually in direct juxtaposition of where they came from. So the Roman soldiers that arrived here may well have come from the farthest reaches of Asia Minor. But the idea was you sent the soldiers to places where they were not familiar. So the Christians in the Roman army will have known about the link between St. Michael and these things. It's conceivable that the awareness of St. Michael as a patron of cemeteries, flocks and herds and verdant places could have reached Wall in the 4th century. Indeed, we know that there were Christians at Wall because the Cairo bowl that was discovered there, which is actually 100 or so years earlier, indicates there were Christians there. And if the traditional belief that the Green Hill at Lichfield was the burial ground for Wall, then that links the whole thing to do with St. Michael and cemeteries. The Green Hill site is elevated. It's an ancient cemetery with a speculation of the links between the Roman settlement and the Green Hill. The fact that Christian Roman soldiers would have venerated St. Michael reinforces that link. It's supported by the fact, as I said already, that they might have come from the east. Now, another factor in relation to the Lichfield Green Hill site is that a pre-Christian existence of a festival called the Green Hill Bower would have involved reverence of the spirits of the woodland, or something akin to Lugus or Mockus. And the arrival of Christianity in the area would have led to the need to substitute old forms of worship with new forms. Indeed, the instructions sent by Pope Gregory the Great via Mellitus to Augustine in about 603 goes as follows. Pope Gregory's instruction was this: destroy the idols, purify the temples with holy water, and set relics there, and let them become temples of the true God. So the people will have no need to change their place of concourse, and where of old they were wont to sacrifice cattle to demons, thither let them continue to resort on the day of the saint to whom the church is dedicated, and slay their beasts no longer as a sacrifice, but for a social meal in honor of him who they now worship. Now, this is the message from Pope Gregory, our Archbishop Augustine, and it's carried by Mellitus, who ultimately was certainly the Bishop of London. In other words, there was a conscious intention on the part of the Pope to try and promote continuity while ensuring that the entirely new focus for faith was introduced. So Lichfield Green Hill site had been the focus of ancient worship and festival, and so perhaps in stages, both of these trends continued to be apparent. People continued to slaughter their animals, but now did so as part of a Christian approach to life, and the saint whose patronage most closely fitted their ancient preoccupation with animal husbandry and its associated woodland was given them as their focus for devotions. St. Michael, therefore, is a symbolic figure who stands part of the Christian tradition. But I want to go on to say that I came across a book by a man called Graham Phillips, which is entitled The Moses Legacy, The Evidence of History. And he reports on archaeological excavations in the Hyksos levels in the Canaanite region of Palestine, which is approximately 1800 to 1500 BC. And he says that in that archaeological level, numerous clay and stone effigies were found. And the Israeli archaeologist, Dr. Isaac Jonah, identified regularly 4 figures as cardinal deities. These 4 figures kept appearing, and he says they might have been celestial guardians. 3 had animal forms, ox, lion, and eagle, and the 4th was human. Sometimes they appeared as 4 sides to one item. Phillips argues that these 4 cardinal deities are reflected in Ezekiel 1:10, where there is a prospect of a visit by a four-winged angel, a four-winged messenger of God. These discoveries are in the area of Shechem, where Genesis tells us was where the Hebrews lived before they migrated to Egypt. Phillips argues that these four archangels may originally have been the four chief Hebrew gods in the polytheistic era before the captivity. And that on their return from Egypt, at which point they had become monotheistic people, the followers of Yahweh, these ancient gods were absorbed into Judaism as archangels, much as the Romans later on, in effect, repurposed most of their gods as saints. Now you can believe that or believe it not, but there's a pattern there. Phillips also points out that these four sets of figures that were being discovered between 1500 and 1800 BC are also the four symbols of these four cardinal deities reappear as the symbols of the four gospel writers: the ox, lion, eagle, and a human face. Now, I want to mention St. Michael in popular culture, just to prove I'm in touch with real life. The American Negro spiritual song, Michael row the boat ashore, hallelujah, is the point I would make. It incorporates the very old tradition as Michael as the receiver of the souls of the dead. And that's in a particular cultural dimension. The Helston Furry Dance, which some of you will be deeply familiar with, which takes place on the 8th of May every year, is also part of this. The Furry Dance celebrates a legend that there was a battle in the sky between St. Michael and the devil across the sky between Mont Saint-Michel and St. Michael's Mount. The story is that the crowd watched this battle, which culminated with the devil throwing a giant rock across the sea at St. Michael's Mount. It missed and landed without causing any casualties at Helston. Ever since then, local people have celebrated the good fortune of this occasion with their street festival, which is the furry dance derives its word from Celtic language, with a date having been chosen as the feast of the apparition of St. Michael. And of course, that takes me back to what I mentioned 10 or 15 minutes ago. The appearance of St. Michael over Mark Gargano in Italy is the apparition. That's when it started. The feast of the apparition is the feast of the appearance of St. Michael. And then the other thing about Helston, of course, is that it's not surprising that the church at Helston is dedicated to St. Michael. And of course, this Helston event it crops up every so often when a new BBC journalist remembers that it happens every so often and they take the cameras down there. Now, there's one other cultural thing I wanted to mention. In rural areas, there is a popular understanding that blackberries need to be harvested before St. Michael's Day on the 29th of September. Otherwise, they will be damaged in some way as to make them inedible by the devil. As far as outside the building, I will be more explicit about what they actually say, but the idea is that the legend is that when the devil was expelled from heaven by St. Michael, he landed uncomfortably on earth in a blackberry bush, and as a result, vowed to poison adherents of St. Michael on his day in perpetuity. Now, it doesn't matter that this is a story, this is a matter of popular understanding. And the evidence of just how firmly this rooted notion can be evidenced by the Nottinghamshire version of the story, which sets the date as the 10th of October, which is known by many, but fewer by the years go by, as Old St. Michael's Day, because the calendar change of 1752 took 11 days out. And on that date, things that had previously happened on the 29th of September moved to the 10th of October. And so that's the natural calendar that's referring to. And it means that when they changed the date, as it were, in Nottinghamshire, this whole cycle proves that there's some dietary significance to this event, because otherwise they wouldn't be so fussed about making sure they got their blackberries picked before the devil turned up. I've got one more piece of news for you, which is, because I'm not very good at this, but I was on the internet. I found a Fox News item from the 26th of March 2014, which reported that an Egyptian mummy with a St. Michael tattoo on its torso, dated to 700 AD, had been discovered. So that just reinforces this idea that St. Michael is cropping up in people's minds. Now, my final comment is this. You may have felt that the title for my talk is inappropriate, that it's rather too pretentious in its reference to theology. The crucial point I want to make is that the identification and veneration of St. Michael stands at the heart of the Judeo-Christian tradition. In essence, St. Michael epitomizes the human identification of the difference between good and evil, right and wrong. The notion of good and evil is in effect at a conceptual level, and by the use of St. Michael at a symbolic level, it has been personalized into a readily recognizable, identifiable form. If one looks carefully at many of the iconographical representations of St. Michael, he is depicted in effect standing on a snake-like figure. In biblical terms, this snake-like figure is the serpent of the Garden of Eden. The idea being conveyed is that St. Michael has been a presence in our theological understanding, in effect, in our relationship with God since the beginning of time. If the serpent represents evil or evil choices, St. Michael stands ready to protect us. This is the message of the book of Revelation, and equally, his role as the most visible opponent of evil is reflected in that English folk story, which I just mentioned, where his status as the representative of good comes under sustained attack by the devil. Now that brings me almost to the end of what I said in my text, but I have been beset by people starting to talk about St. Michael and all angels, and as it's St. Michael and all angels, and angels is a theme, I just want to mention the fact that if you go back in historical documents, it's very unlikely that you will find anywhere that's called St. Michael and All Angels Church before the middle of the 19th century. In the heart of the high church movement of the late 19th century, church names began to be evolved. As they opened more churches, there were a lot of Holy Trinities and St. John the Divine and things like that. But also, St. Michael churches started to be called St. Michael and All Angels. And that pattern was exacerbated by the Pope in the 1960s, when the Pope rearranged the feasts of St. Gabriel and St. Raphael to be celebrated also on the 29th of September. So the Catholic Church emphasized that it was St. Michael and All Angels. And if you took the particular example of this church, I would argue that when the Reverend Derek Smith was in pole position, this was not called the Feast of St. Michael and All Angels. It wasn't for most of the time that his successor was, but he started sneaking in the word and all angels every so often. And the last rector definitely added and all angels to the celebration, but that is part of a trend that was not a historical trend. And the crucial point is the recognition that in some shape or form, the church has managed to grasp hold of this idea of St. Michael, personify it to make it a symbol of this division between good and evil, and that is what, since I'm so excited by in what we we might find, and will continue to find, because more examples will come to light. Thank you.